The following is a segment from the Carl King Podcast. If you enjoy this show, be sure to like, subscribe, and send us burritos. Up next, we have The Thing from 1982, starring Wilford Brimley, who plays the role of a doctor. And this was perhaps the start of his long career in the field of medicine. The Thing was directed by John Carpenter with a screenplay by Bill Lancaster, who also wrote some of the Bad News Bears movies and nothing else. If that doesn't tell you how speculative this business is, I don't know what will. The Thing is actually based on a 1938 novella called Who Goes There? And the first movie based on it was The Thing from Another World in 1951. Now, here's something that surprised me. This movie came out in 1982, but they started development for this version in the mid-70s. That's a long time. It went through several writers and directors before landing in the hands of John Carpenter. And for reference, this movie came out after Escape from New York, which was in 1981, the year before. Now, this movie opened on the same day as Blade Runner, and it performed so poorly that, according to Wikipedia, John Carpenter lost his job as director of what would be his next film, Firestarter, and Universal bought out his multiple film contract. In other words, they paid him money so he would stop making movies for them. But it turned out Firestarter didn't do too great without him either. And here's what's hard for me to accept. That one of the most influential directors in the world, having created so many iconic films, was considered a failure at almost every step. And maybe it shows how short-sighted the film studios are, or how short-sighted everyone is. Because his career is like a bunch of box office bombs in a row that add up to a legend. John Carpenter has directed 24 films now. The latest was in 2010 called The Ward, starring everyone's favorite woman, Amber Heard. Now, John Carpenter was 62 at the time he directed The Ward, and it, of course, guess what? It bombed. It made only half of its budget back. Now, is there some kind of rule that John Carpenter's films will only make exactly half of their budget back? Is it like a curse? Or some kind of mathematical absolute? To balance out the universe, is there a director out there whose films always make exactly double of their budget back? My guess is this. Maybe his films only bomb because they're being marketed as mainstream films. Force-fed to large audiences, rather than cult films for the true fans, because his works are beloved within the horror genre. And that actually seems to be why Carpenter quit making major films. Okay, so back to The Thing. Oddly enough, on Letterboxd, The Thing comes up as the most popular of John Carpenter's films, even above Halloween, which somehow comes in second. And I would have thought Halloween would be 1, and maybe Big Trouble in Little China would be 2. But hey, the snobby film people have spoken. So here we go. Let's do some analysis. This is another film with 2 minutes of white credits over black and some music. 2 whole minutes. Now, I wonder, how expensive is it in terms of attention to fill the first 2 minutes of a film? Well, if you take the film's entire budget, which was $15 million, and divide it by the total running time of 109 minutes, those opening credits were worth about $275,000 in 1982, and that would be $844,000 in 2022 today. So that's almost $500,000 a minute. Well, no wonder movies spend so little time on simple opening and end credits these days. But also, maybe you can get away with that kind of thing when people are already in their seats in a theater to see a horror movie in the 80s. But in these times of streaming, how many people would already be bored and click away? I know on YouTube, no one would have the patience. The movie would need to get to it in 30 seconds, and if not 10 seconds, because otherwise the audience is long gone. And this film reminds me a bit of The Shining from 1980, only 2 years earlier. When I looked that up, I was surprised The Shining was from 1980. I would have never thought of The Shining as technically an 80s movie. I honestly assumed this whole time that it was from the 60s or 70s. And that shows you how little I know. But that's what we're here for, to learn. And some of us, like me, will never learn. Anyway, the reason I bring up The Shining, this is another spooky film about people in an isolated, snowy location trying to entertain themselves and kind of losing their minds. They're pretty much doing nothing. But then the story creates intrigue with that husky. What's the deal with that? Is the husky the thing? Or is the guy in the helicopter chasing the husky and shooting at it the thing? Well, we don't know. This is a slow movie. 17 minutes in, and we still don't know the premise of what's going on. We know that something is up, and a guy in a helicopter went crazy. There's also a flying saucer in the opening first shot. What was that about? Are we going to see aliens here, or... And speaking of aliens, this actually reminds me of Alien from 1979 by Ridley Scott. In the meantime, this film has naturalistic acting, and the characters are constantly drinking. It's kind of like Portland. And there's so little going on that by the middle of the movie, about an hour in, I started to check out. Now, I'm not caring about the story at all, and you know why? Because I think once we know it's an alien that's infecting and trying to kill everyone, it stops being a film and becomes a video game. And once we know the stakes, can the filmmaker sustain the story? In order to do that, I think the novelty and the surprise has to increase. It can't just be characters running from a bad guy, which is what so many horror movies turn into. Now, I'm not interested in a clearly defined field with two teams like football. And what I like to see are more twists and mysteries. Keep surprising me with unexpected turns, not just escalation of the same thing with bigger and bigger explosions. Because otherwise, we pretty much know what's going to happen. The good guy will probably win. Aha, but good news. This story has an ambiguous ending, which is just two guys staring at each other, and we don't know which one of them is the thing. I like that Kurt Russell said that scene ends on the basic theme of the film, which is paranoia, and that's some good stuff. So the filmmaking lessons to extract might be, number one, keep the story fresh and surprising beyond the beginning of the third act. You've got to keep us guessing. Don't just make us watch sports. And two, it's possible to have a very long and successful directing career, even if many of your films quote-unquote fail. That is, if you're John Carpenter. Well, my own personal opinion, I didn't emotionally enjoy this film a whole lot. But it's a classic, and it did give me a lot to think about. So, just because I didn't exactly like it, I still think it's good, so I gave it 5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd. If you enjoyed this segment from the Carl King podcast, remember, you can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or through an old rubber hose.